Hello, everyone, and welcome to the July presentation of the Friends of History First Wednesday Lecture Series. The lecture today is being sponsored by the Chavez Library in the History Museum and by the Friends of History. Our speaker is University of Denver professor, Dr. Jeanne Abrams, who will speak on Jewish women pioneering the frontier trail in the American West. Ms. Abrams will be introduced by Ms. Heather McClure, librarian with the Chavez Library. Here is Ms. McClure.
Hello, I'm Heather McClure from the New Mexico History Museum. This month's lecture is brought to you by the Sue and Felix Warburg Collection in honor of Willie and Flora Spiegelberg. Thank you to the Friends of History for hosting this inaugural lecture on Jewish history in the Southwest. I am delighted that Jeanne Abrams, the director of the Rocky Mountain Jewish Historical Society and Beck Archives, and a professor of history at the University of Denver, joins us today to start the series. Through a generous gift from Sue and Felix Warburg, the New Mexico History Museum is strengthening its collection of materials and information about Jewish pioneers and expanding related educational programs. The scope of this initiative is anchored in the experience of Jewish pioneers in New Mexico between 1820 and 1900, but extends to address the social, political, economic, and religious context of this community and their history in the region. I hope you will join us for other lectures from the Friends of History and interesting new developments on Jewish history research from the New Mexico History Museum.
I'm very pleased to be able to join you this afternoon. I thought I'd begin by telling you about what propelled me to first write my book about Western Jewish women. Although my book, Jewish Women Pioneering the Frontier Trail, A History in the American West, was published in 2007, the idea had been germinating for decades. My family and I moved to Denver in 1973 from New York City, and I immediately fell in love with Colorado and the Western landscape, particularly the open spaces, at least they were open at that time, and the energizing feeling of possibility that it created. When this famous cover of the New Yorker magazine appeared in 1976, I had already considered myself a transplanted Westerner, and it aroused my ire. As you will note, the bottom half of the cover features the skyline of New York City, Manhattan specifically, bordered by the Hudson River and on to Jersey, or New Jersey, as it's known to the rest of the world. From there, the rest of the United States is compressed to occupy a tiny space. Then there is the tiny Pacific Ocean, and in the distance, one can just make out a faint reference to Asia and Europe. In other words, although it may be slightly exaggerated, this is a somewhat common New York and East Coast perception of the world. There is New York City, and then there is the rest of America, all commonly referred to by New Yorkers as out of town. Western history for many years, even among historians, was a virtually unexplored area, and Jewish history in the West was at best relegated to a footnote. Later, I was privileged to receive a fellowship from the Jewish Women's Archive in Boston to write an article on the role of Colorado Jewish women in philanthropy. My research led me to realize that Denver Jewish women played a crucial role in the building of the city, particularly in the area of social welfare and reform. And I set out to explore if that pattern held true for other Western cities. It did. My main thesis is that Jews, particularly Jewish women, found unprecedented opportunity in the early American West. Jewish women took advantage of those opportunities well in advance of women in other areas of the country, and took leading positions in social welfare, business, education, the professions, and politics, while at the same time ensuring Jewish continuity. In part, they were able to pursue these goals because of timing. Jews arrived in the West just as communities were being established, and because society in the early West was of necessity more fluid than in other established parts of the country. Also because no one religion held sway here. Jews, Protestants, and Catholics coexisted in relative equanimity, and the United States was really the first country in the world that was founded without any formal established state religion. And that was even more apparent in the American West, unlike the Eastern United States, where Protestantism held sway and dominated. In other words, after centuries of discrimination, for the most part, Jews were welcomed as equal partners in building new communities in the West. While the number of Jewish women in the American West was very small, only 300,000 Jews lived in the entire region in 1925, while there were more than 1.5 million Jews living in New York City alone at the same time. They had a disproportionate influence on the development of the American West. I'm going to begin by introducing you to a rather remarkable young Western Jewish female journalist, Alice Friedlander. In 1893, Alice was 17 years old and was asked to deliver the keynote address on the subject of women's rights before the Portland, Oregon Press Club. Her speech was published in full the following day in the Portland Oregonian. Let me quote a few excerpts from her talk. Quote, "This is women's golden era," maintained Alice. "Not only in the newspaper office does women find a clear field, but the time is near when women will vote and hold office, and the law, medicine, education, every walk of life, still requiring intellectual rather than manual force, is wide open to the women of America." While in retrospect, we may find Alice's words overly optimistic and somewhat naive, by the 1880s, women's sphere was undoubtedly enlarging. And in the American West, women already had the right to vote in Wyoming and Colorado. As a matter of fact, in 1893, Denver was the largest city in America where women could vote. What's most important about Alice's vision is not so much whether she was correct in her assessment, but it reflected the psychological sense of promise and opportunity that she and many women were feeling in the American West. The arrival of Jewish women in the West heralded the building of Jewish institutions. They were in the forefront of founding Jewish synagogues, Jewish educational institutions, and Jewish women's societies and charities. Yet, as the story of Denver's Frances Weisbart Jacobs demonstrates, they were also central to general community building within the wider community. And because of the nature of the American West, they were closer to the centers of power than women were in many other areas of the country. In other words, these Western Jewish women lived rich Jewish lives, but also full public lives. Frances Weisbart Jacobs arrived in Central City, Colorado in 1863 as a young bride. Her husband, merchant Abraham Jacobs, was one of the original Colorado 1859ers and had served as secretary of the famous Moonlight Meeting of 1860 that merged the towns of Denver and Auraria into Denver City. Frances's brother, Ben Weisbart, was elected mayor of Central City in 1876. When Frances and her family moved to Denver in the early 1870s, she became an icon in the area of philanthropy. She served as president of Denver's Hebrew Ladies Benevolent Society and as a founder and first vice president of the non-sectarian Denver Ladies Relief Society. Here, Frances worked alongside Margaret Gray Evans, the territorial governor's wife, and Elizabeth Byers, wife of Rocky Mountain News editor and founder William Byers. Among her many accomplishments, Frances was the founder of Denver's first free kindergarten, which at the time was essentially a daycare center for children of working class mothers, a rather radical notion at the time. Together with a Catholic priest and a Protestant minister, Frances also founded the Denver Charity Organization, which evolved into the Community Chest and was the forerunner of the National United Way. And she is recognized as the co-founder of the national organization. In the late 19th and early 20th century, tuberculosis was the leading cause of illness and death in America. Perhaps most importantly, Frances made the plight of tuberculosis victims who were flocking to Colorado her mission, and she was the primary impetus behind the founding of what became National Jewish Hospital for Consumptives. When 10 stained glass windows were erected in the Colorado State Capitol building to honor Denver's outstanding pioneers, Frances was featured as the only woman in the group. Nicknamed Denver's Mother of Charities, there is no doubt that in addition to reflecting sincere altruism, Frances consciously used philanthropy in a political way to enlarge the contemporary parameters of women's sphere. And she was a fervent supporter of women's suffrage and better working conditions, particularly for women and children. Another early Jewish woman, Flora Langerman Spiegelberg, played a prominent role in early New Mexico. Born in New York City in 1857 to an American-born mother and a father who hailed from Bavaria, at the age of 17 in 1874, she married Willie Spiegelberg, a German-born immigrant who had built a prosperous business with his 4 brothers in New Mexico. The first Spiegelbergs arrived in the area as early as 1844. After their marriage, Flora and Willie undertook an extended honeymoon in Europe, but in 1875, they traveled back to the American West, first by train to Los Animas. They spent a harrowing night in what was called a crowded hotel in Colorado, packed with rough cowboys, before embarking on a 6-day taxing stagecoach trip to Santa Fe, during which Flora suffered a miscarriage. Flora later recalled that when they finally arrived at their destination, she was, quote, only the 8th American woman in Santa Fe. There were about 50 American men, officials, and merchants, and a Mexican population of about 2,000. The Jewish community numbered less than 100, but Flora would become one of the growing city's most prominent citizens. A leader in local society, Flora would entertain elite New Mexicans of Spanish Catholic descent and visiting dignitaries, especially after Willie was elected mayor of Santa Fe in 1880. Flora was also prominent in the small Jewish community, founding the first Jewish Sabbath school and hosting celebrations for the high holidays and Passover at her home. She later recalled that her family received yearly gifts of fruit and flowers from Santa Fe's Catholic Archbishop to mark the Jewish holiday of Rosh Hashanah, reflecting the amiable relations between the two religious groups. And she also organized the first non-sectarian girls' school in Santa Fe. Flora was also a member for many years of Santa Fe's City Commission and was the force behind the building of the city's first children's playground. She not only supported her husband's career, his political career, but played a central role in the development of the city's sanitary and waste planning program during a 20-year period, reflecting the prominent role early Jewish women played in the West. The American West was also an especially hospitable environment for women in the area of business. Throughout the United States, American women often used what was then known as the traditional, quote, female sphere of home and fashion consciously to their advantage as opportunities for business endeavors. And in the West, they were able to command top dollar for their work. Moreover, the frontier character of early Western society allowed for a more liberal definition of gender roles than in other parts of the country. Anna Freudenthal Solomon is a prime example of a resourceful woman who made the most of her opportunities. Anna and her husband immigrated to Pennsylvania from Poland in 1872. Economic success for the family was elusive in the East, and it was Anna who encouraged their migration west. In her memoirs, Anna recalled, quote, that the couple sold everything we possessed except our 3 children and set out for New Mexico. She stated forcefully that, quote, we decided to make the move. Her granddaughter later observed that despite Anna's charming personality, quote, in family matters, Anna was the dominant force. The trip west was long and difficult, and after they came to the end of the railroad line in La Junta in the Colorado Territory, they had, quote, had to travel by stage, packed in like sardines day and night for 6 days. In Las Cruces, New Mexico, the family found, quote, the best house in town, but Anna recalled, I could not help having tears come to my eyes when I saw the mud floors and the mud walls. Still demonstrating her remarkable spirit and adaptability, she soon had the house in order. Shortly after that, the family moved again, this time to the remote village of Pueblo Vallejo in the Arizona Territory, deep in Apache land. Since their furniture and goods for a planned store didn't arrive for 3 months, Anna was forced to make do with no beds to sleep in, no stove to cook in, no table to eat off, no flour to bake bread. Still, Anna persevered, running the family dry goods store on her own while raising 6 children, and later operating her popular hotel, which attracted people from throughout the region. Isidore, her husband, built a successful charcoal business, and Anna and Isidore became prominent figures in the small community, later renamed Solomonville in their honor, which became the county seat. They also operated the Solomon Commercial Company, the hotel, a ranch, and later the Valley Bank. There are stories of countless other Western Jewish women who created business empires, such as Marianne Cohn Magnin in San Francisco, who founded and ran the major I. Magnin Company. Jeanette Hirsch Meyer, who after her husband's death in 1889, presided over the largest department store in the Northwest, and little Ruth Moscow Handler in the picture is the little girl dressed in a nurse's uniform of Denver, who co-founded the enormously successful Mattel toy company and was the creator of the Barbie doll. Young Jewish women in the American West also benefited from the region's generally progressive attitude toward female education. In a 1924 interview in the newspaper, Harriet Asham Choinsky, who had arrived in San Francisco as a child in 1850, recalled that in the early 1860s, quote, the big fuss then was whether or not a girl was going to be ruined by going to high school. I am proud to say that San Francisco decided against the nationwide prejudice and pioneered in girls' education. Harriet graduated with the first class of 13 students from the General High School of San Francisco in 1861 and went on to become a teacher. Most people are surprised to learn that in 1900, the percentage of females enrolled in high schools was the highest in the American West, slightly higher than in the Northeast and significantly higher than in the South. The West was also progressive at the college level, where almost all schools were co-ed, and Jewish women were quick to take advantage of the educational opportunities afforded to them in the region. A number graduated with professional degrees, and it is very interesting to note that in 1900, while only about 8% of women held professional occupations nationally, nearly 16% did in the American West, virtually doubled the general American trend. Many early Western Jewish women attained successful careers. Adele Solomon Jaffa of San Francisco, who graduated from Hahnemann Medical College of the Pacific in 1893 and later became a pioneer child psychiatrist, was one of those early pioneering professional women. Jessica Passato received a PhD from the University of California at Berkeley in 1900 in social economics, the second woman to be awarded a doctorate at the school. In the early 1900s, she became Berkeley's first female faculty member, authored several books in her field, and in 1918, she was named the school's first female professor. Her interest in social work and young people led her to the appointment to the California State Board of Charities and Corrections. And for many years in that capacity, she had major oversight over California's juvenile penal system. Her academic accomplishments are particularly impressive because most women at co-ed institutions around the country who attain faculty status rarely achieved full professorships. At the age of 18, Bella Waretnikow Rosenbaum, an Eastern European Jewish immigrant, skipped her last year of high school in Seattle to begin college early at the University of Washington. She loved college, and in her diary, she recalled from that very first day at college, she felt at home in the academic environment where, quote, one is so entirely independent, and at once decided that law would be my profession. As a college senior on her way to a BA in political science in 1900, she also simultaneously enrolled as a student in the first class of the University of Washington's law school. In May of 1901, she graduated, and less than a week later, she was admitted to the Washington State Bar. The first Jewish female attorney in the state, and only the fourth woman from any religious or ethnic group there. In the first law class of 30 students that she was in, 3 were women, and Bella recalled, the fact that I was Jewish did not seem to have any significance at the time. That it did not have any significance at the time was very significant because many colleges, particularly Ivy School League schools in the East, most notably Harvard, had a specific and very limited quota for Jewish students. The area of politics presented unique opportunities for Western women. With the exception of the state of New Mexico, women in every state in the West could vote before the passage of the 19th Amendment in 1920. For example, women in Wyoming won the right in 1890, Colorado in 1893, Utah and Idaho in 1896. Jewish women had already exercised their political influence largely through their key roles in social welfare and reform. However, some Jewish women in the region were eager to enter the formal political world, and Belle Fliegelman Weinstein in Montana and Florence Progton in California were 2 of the most prominent. Belle had received a degree in journalism from the University of Wisconsin in 1912 and had returned home from school to her hometown of Helena, Montana, as a reporter for the Helena Independent, just as the women's suffrage campaign was heating up. Articulate, bright, and feisty, Belle campaigned all over the state. One time in a saloon in a mountain town where she had to hold the lantern all the way home so the woman who was driving the horse-drawn cart could see her way in the dark. Quote, my mother was horrified is the way Bell recalled her stepmother's reaction in 1914 on hearing that Bell had delivered a political speech on behalf of women's suffrage on a busy Helena street. According to Bell, her stepmother made her displeasure over her stepdaughter's high-profile political involvement very clear. She told Bell, quote, while it was all right for women to vote, my mother said, no respectable lady would speak on a street corner. She warned me that if I made one more speech on the street, I needn't come home. That night I slept at a hotel and charged it to my father. Of course, women's suffrage was passed in Montana in 1914, making it one of the last states in the West to allow women the right to vote, but still years ahead of the rest of the nation. When Bell's political mentor, pacifist Jeanette Rankin, ran for office and was elected to Congress in 1916, the first woman in the nation to hold that office, Bell was invited to come on board as Rankin's assistant and speechwriter. In 1999, Bell was named one of the most influential Montanans of the 20th century. Florence Prague-Kahn had an even more high-profile political career. The daughter of California Jewish pioneers, Florence received a BA from the University of California in 1887 and taught history in English on the high school level. Her mother, Mary Goldsmith Prague, was a high school teacher and a vice principal in early San Francisco, and in the 1930s became the first Jewish woman to serve on the San Francisco Board of Education. In 1899, Mary's daughter Florence married Julius Kahn, a popular local Jewish Republican politician. And that was the same year Julius was elected to serve in the House of Representatives from San Francisco, and the couple soon moved together to Washington, D.C. In the nation's capital, the astute and articulate Florence served as Julius's secretary and advisor, and at the same time contributed a regular political column to the San Francisco Chronicle. When Julius died suddenly in 1924, Florence was elected in a close special race to take his place and went on to be reelected 5 more successive terms in her own right until her defeat in 1936 in the wake of the Roosevelt landslide. And she proved to be an extremely able and forceful politician in her own right. In 1929, Florence was appointed the first woman to serve on the powerful House Armed Services Committee and the Appropriation Committee. And when she died, the New York Times obituary noted that she was known for her, quote, occasionally frightening talents for ramming through legislation. Generally conservative Republican, who also supported a number of liberal positions, she was known for her capability, outspokenness, and wit. And one journalist observed, quote, you always knew how Florence was going to vote, but only God had the slightest inkling of what she was going to say. FDR's equally outspoken relative, Alice Roosevelt Longworth, summed up Florence in a national magazine article as follows, quote, Mrs. Kahn, shrewd, resourceful, and witty, is an all-around first-rate legislator, the equal of any man in Congress and the superior of most. While few Jewish women or women of any ethnic or religious group in the early West were actually elected to office, many were political activists who made their presence felt, particularly in the area of social welfare that affected families, women, and children. I'm going to end with a short description of Golda Meir, who became one of the most influential political leaders of the 20th century as Prime Minister of Israel. You may be wondering how Golda Meibovich Meyerson, as she was first known, fits into a study of Jewish women of the American West. Golda actually lived in Denver for about a year and a half through 1913 to 1914. And later in her autobiography, she recalled that year as one of the most seminal in her life. Golda's sister, Shana Korngold, was one of the hundreds of East European Jews who flocked to Denver to chase the cure, as it was called at the time, for tuberculosis. After recovering her health, Jeanne married Sam Korngold and settled in a small duplex in Denver's West Side Jewish immigrant community. Golda ran away from her parents' home in Milwaukee to live with her sister when her parents refused to let her attend high school in her hometown. In Denver, Golda thrived in the fluid environment and attended North High School, where she really achieved excellent grades, I think, in every subject except mechanical drawing. Most importantly, it was in Denver that Golda was exposed to the many intellectuals who came to the Korngold house for tea and heated discussions about a variety of contemporary issues, such as socialism and women's place in society, to which, according to Golda in her memoir, she listened to raptly. And this is where she developed her commitment to democratic socialism. As Golda related later in her memoirs, quote, "In Denver, life really opened up for me, and I found the ideological discussions about politics much more interesting than my school lessons." Life really opened up, as Golda Meir put it, for many Jewish women in the American West. Jews who migrated to the region in the 19th and early 20th century encountered unprecedented opportunity and acceptance as pioneer community builders who helped construct basic institutions. And Jewish women were quick to take advantage of their circumstances to open new doors for themselves in the public domain. Jewish women in the American West broadened the definition of women's sphere to showcase their considerable organizational skills and diverse talents, and helped counter previously prevailing Eastern arguments about the parameters of women's sphere. They were crucial to the survival of their early communities and made distinct contributions, not only in shaping Jewish communal life, but in the wider community as well. Western Jewish women's level of involvement at the vanguard of social welfare and progressive reform, commerce, politics, and higher education, and the professions is striking, given their relatively small numbers. These Jewish female pioneers of diverse backgrounds synthesized the Jewish, American, and Western values they had developed, and in the process, they helped shape the contours of the future of Western towns and cities, as well as the American Jewish community. Thank you. I enjoyed being with you.
Thank you, Dr. Abrams, for providing us with this excellent discussion on Jewish pioneer women and their contribution in settling the American West. We have been fortunate to have this opportunity for you to speak to us and wish you all the best as you pursue this unique part of Western history. I also want to thank Heather McClure for arranging this talk. For our audience, in closing, you can rewatch this and other presentations of the Friends of History First Wednesday lecture series on our webpage, friendsofhistorynm.org. For next month, our guest will be Virgil Ortiz, the award-winning artist who will speak about his experiences participating in the Santa Fe Indian Market. This talk will coincide with the opening of the New Mexico History Museum's exhibit, marking the 100th anniversary of the Indian Market this year. Further details on this talk and on the exhibit will become available on the History Museum and Friends of History webpages. If you wish to learn more about all our upcoming lectures, or more broadly about the Friends of History, we urge you to join our mailing list, if you have not already done so, either via our webpage or by emailing us at nmhmfriendsofhistory@gmail.com. As well, we will request you consider making a donation through our webpage. so that the Friends of History can continue this lecture series and support other History Museum programming. We look forward to seeing you in the months ahead. Goodbye for now.